So welcome everyone to episode 7 with Professor Alphonso Lingis. This is part of the podcast Care and the Future of Learning. And in this episode, we'll discuss the idea of care and criminalising, which was Professor Alphonso Lingis's paper. Alphonso Lingis, usually I ask people to say a little bit about their own research and work. And but before I ask you to say that, I mean, I'd like to say that, I've worked with you over maybe 30 years now, nearly. And, for me, you're one of the world's most prominent phenomenologists, philosophers, ethicists. So it's a great privilege to have you have contributed to this particular journal. But just in general, it's been a wonderful experience working with you. So, yeah, do you want to just maybe talk a little bit about this idea of care and criminalising and maybe your own work in relationship? Yeah, the dark underside.
In the general political policies to deal with school shootings, there is this dark side of students when they're going through these electronic devices at the entrance, when they walk under cameras and so on, they're already feeling that they're, under suspicion, that they are, that people think that they're possibly doing something wrong or illegal or violent. So to instill that, generation of students, yeah.
I'm just interested in that because just to so if we move it away for a moment from the context of, learning and the future and all of that. So, I mean, I guess the question of care more generally that you're putting forward is that it has within it, I mean, there's been a lot of, writing over the last decades, feminist scholars and different kind of, philosophers around care and trying to think about it. But what's interesting, I think, in what you're saying is that, sometimes the dark side, in a sense, becomes imbued with power that then therefore neglects perhaps the interrelationships that need to be observed. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Genuine care. Well, there's, care between equals is one thing, but care between people who are not equal in age or in power or in ability is a special, issue. It's like I'm thinking for a moment about philosophers, like philosophers who, like Nietzsche, who despise the idea of having disciples. That knowing that their own great intellectual powers can sort of hypnotize other people. I mean, I had a colleague like that who was so in admiration of his teacher, who was Leo Strauss, and who was an important philosopher, that he spent his whole career just sort of being a disciple, even though I thought that he had exceptional intellectual gifts. So when one is a person of power among equals, care could be one thing. Care could be quite pure, that one cares for the needs and vulnerability of the other person without in any way wishing or enjoying power over them. But of course, there is always a dark side, that is possible. It's always possible, as my friend in his institutions, feeling that he had to get out because the situation of being totally in charge of people who are mentally incapacitated does funny things to oneself.
But that's the bit that has to be challenged, right? Because in some ways, you know, people that do take, because, you know, there's so many people that need care, you know, whether it's from, you know, taking care of learning in the one hand, or taking care of people who are unwell, or taking care of people who, you know, need special kind of ways of living, and addressing those ways of living, because otherwise it just, you know, it does kind of replicate or reproduce those inequalities and those power and the abuse, in a sense, too, because it doesn't enable, you know, I was going to say responsibility, but you know, I'm starting to move away from that word a little bit, and trying to create new ways of thinking about it. I mean, I'm influenced a lot by Levinas and that idea, and also your work on responsibility. But I'm just trying to think about, you know, how do we, what are some of your thoughts? I mean, these are very, you know, obviously it's a question throwing at you now, but what are some of your thoughts then on maybe the ethical role in that?
Well, I think it's intrinsically ethical. When you have people who are joined together in a common project, whatever it be, and education is one of them, it's certainly issues of responsibility and respect are fundamental. You know, quite a long time ago, I had this idea as a teacher. I was thinking in particular in higher education, where very often, especially in state universities, I taught at Penn State and I had classes of 200, 300, even 400 students. So, of course, there is no question and answer in a classroom. The teacher just lectures. And it occurred to me that this itself is a very weird situation. In no other situation in life do you stand there and just talk, you know, without anyone interrupting, without anyone questioning, without anyone throwing in their own ideas. You know, that seems to me a sort of intrinsically corrupting situation. And that I could see with professors. There are professors who get big bloated heads, you know, as a result. That carries on outside the classroom, carries on in faculty meetings, and no doubt in their own homes. In their own, I'm thinking in particular of a colleague that I know he carried on this way in his own home. So I think the situation of educator is really has its own particularities, you know. The situation that the relationship is between unequals, and it's the dangers that that the superior person who does care about his subject and cares about the students. The care is certainly real, but there are these intrinsic sort of temptations and dangers in the situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I've observed that as well, I have to say. But I'm just thinking, to just, because this is just a short podcast, I just wanted to round it up a little bit, but I was intrigued by that comment that you were saying that, you know, Nietzsche didn't want disciples. And there's something about that, you know, is interesting in terms of perhaps that notion of the educator. Like, is it in that care for knowledge, or for the exchange of knowledge, that you, rather than seeking the sort of reflection of your own ideas, you're trying to open up the space, and therefore there can be no disciple in that sense, if that makes sense. I mean, it was interesting that you brought that up, and I just thought, yeah, it's about actually allowing people to take their own path or their own journey in terms of that question of care.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, a teacher is teaching material that has accumulated and that exists. You know, the subject matter, the teacher is teaching mathematics or history or philosophy, or whatever it is. There's this material, there are these authors you read, there's a material you study and master, and you help the students to understand it and to master it. But yet at the same time, in some degree, one wants to encourage the student to try to think beyond that, think on their own, question on their own. Certainly in subjects like philosophy or psychology, but also I think in subjects like mathematics, because there is always progress. There are always thinkers who can contribute, so that when you're teaching mathematics, you're not just depositing rote material. To some measure, you're hoping to kindle some thinking that exists among the students. You know, I had this thought so long ago that our fingers are unique. I mean, the fingerprint is unique. And if these, 20, 30 lines are not duplicated by any human being, think of our brains. I mean, every brain is different. And so I think an essential part of teaching is not only to acquire and master the existing material, but also kindle some kind of individual insights, some sort of kind of individual questionings and insights on the part of the students. So I think the caring about the material involves that. It involves caring about not only the existing material, but the future of the material.
Yeah, I think that's that's a good point, perhaps, to round off in thinking about the future and thinking about learning. But that idea of the fingerprint and the mind fingerprint or the brain fingerprint, I think, is interesting. That there's a kind of real uniqueness to everybody's practice and learning and experience, and in a way, it's trying to make that flourish in whichever way one learns, I guess. And I think you're right too. If people are criminalised through different socioeconomic situations, then the ability to sort of provide that fingerprint in a way is diminished. It just becomes an ink print of it, of the criminalised code. So there's something really fascinating about that. So to just round off, was there any final comments or statements you'd like to make before we finish for today's short podcast?
Just a thought that your own initiative of collecting thinkers to think about care and education, I think is wonderful. It's a wonderful topic, and it's a topic that should be enriched, because I think we've come to understand how little we really have thought about it.
Thanks, Al. It's wonderful to have you, and we'll finish up for now. So I'll just stop the recording.